Hey, what's up everybody, it's Jack Mini Trades back here again with another video, and today we're going to be doing a review of my Sony FX3, which is right here. And I'm sure that you guys have noticed that from pretty much May onward, the production quality of my videos is pretty substantially increased, and I think that one of the main reasons for that is my transition away from the iPhone 14 Pro Max and to this camera system. So, as with all of my videos, I'm going to be leaving links to everything that I discussed down below, of course, so if you choose to buy anything from them, I will get a small commission as full disclosure, but it doesn't cost you anything, and it goes a long way towards supporting the channel and helping out the type of content that I do here. So I would really also appreciate it if you guys dropped a like, shared the video with your friends and anybody else that you think might find some value out of this, and also, of course, smash that subscribe button. But with that being said, let's get straight into the video. So in the 4 months that I've had this camera, I've used it on a couple of photo shoots and 2 major productions, including a wedding and a wedding reception. As well, I've also used this on a lot of personal projects, like taking this out to do some nature video and capture some birds and mammals in the Avalon Nature Preserve in Stony Brook, New York. By the way, if you guys are in the area, I would highly recommend going there. It's a really, really nice place. It's pretty substantial as far as the breadth of the place and the types of wildlife that you can find there. So if you are a nature enthusiast, definitely go ahead and check that out. And although this camera was originally released in March of 2021, so it's now a little bit over 2.5 years old, I think that it's still absolutely worth it if you want to have the best video experience on a Sony system with the option of capturing stills in a pinch. This camera offers so many features that I think professionals would really care about, like anamorphic D-squeeze support for some of the common ratios that are out there, like 2 times. It doesn't offer everything, and it's nowhere near as expansive as something like the Atomos Ninja 5 or Ninja 5 Plus, but I think for anybody who in a pinch needs to use the rear monitor, this is a really welcome feature. Although generally speaking, if you're a professional, I think that you're going to be using an external monitor anyway, but I did want to mention it in case you're interested in using the rear monitor. But this also includes DCI 4K at true 24p, as well as other professional codecs like XAVCSI, which is an all-intro recording format, 422 10-bit S-Log3, color profile. You also have the XLR handle, which I have mounted right up here, and so that's great for getting amazing quality professional direct in-camera audio recording. This also has timecode support, which is of course something that professionals would need. If you don't know anything about timecode, don't worry about it, but if you are a professional, you absolutely know about timecode and will find that really important in your purchase decision of this camera. Another thing that I really love is that this has a full-sized HDMI port. HDMI in the microform is pretty weak, and there's a lot of cases where you may end up breaking your cable or something else might end up happening. With the full-size HDMI, it's much more robust, it's more widely available. Overall, it's just way better. Another thing is that this supports USB-C power delivery, so if you have an external battery, like say a V-mount or something like that, you can just plug this in and run it directly off of that for hours and hours and hours, which negates the need to keep swapping batteries in and out of this camera. You can just leave one in, have it plugged into power delivery on an external battery supply, and that'll last you for up to over an entire day of shooting. So definitely a really great thing to have. Another thing is that this has Bluetooth, and it also has Wi-Fi, so you can tether this to your phone or to your computer, anything like that. This is pretty great for. You also have dual memory card slots, which is something extremely important to any professional out there, especially if you've ever experienced losing all of your work because of a failed memory card. This will really fix that for you if you choose to do dual recording. Another thing is that this has a built-in fan, so that way you can cool it, and it has the ability to film cropless 4K at 24, 60, and 120 FPS for up to 8 times slow motion. And you have no recording limit internally, so that's another thing that's really important. A lot of cameras coming out these days don't have recording limits anymore, but I still think that it's something that's important to mention, considering that there are still quite a few cameras out there that do have recording limits. Another thing is that you can even record ProRes RAW at 4K 24 or 4K 60p using something like the Atomos Ninja 5 or Ninja 5 Plus, so that we have the ultimate post-processing flexibility. This camera has been the topic of some controversy ever since its release. The fact that it bears the Cinema Line badge but is so small and compact in this full-frame mirrorless body, I think is something that has kind of shaken up the filmmaking industry quite a bit. A lot of people generally look at this camera as more of a toy than it is a real cinema camera. But to those people, I would say there is a new movie that's just coming out that is actually filmed on the Sony FX3, and it had quite a large budget, and they could have used an ARRI Alexa or they could have used a Sony Venice, but they chose to use the Sony FX3. So I think that that speaks volumes in terms of how capable this camera actually is in the day-to-day. With that being said, I do understand that sometimes when you mention cinema, we immediately think of large camera bodies with SDI ports, switches, knobs everywhere, and this camera is obviously outside of those parameters. But even with that, I still think that this offers quite a bit of value to professionals and small-time filmmakers alike for a couple of reasons. The first of which I would say is the price. Certainly, it's not a cheap camera by any means, at nearly $4,000 retail. This is a full-frame, backside illuminated 12 megapixel sensor with a small body. It has excellent autofocus. It's got a lot of other features that I had previously mentioned at the start of this video, and all of those features are things that professionals would really care about. And many of these professional level features are not even available for cameras that are less than $10,000. So in that respect, I'd say that this camera is a pretty great value, despite the fact that it has some shortcomings, notably the lack of built-in ND filters, like its bigger brother, the Sony FX6. But even still, I think that the small size of this camera is more suitable for shooting styles like run and gun than the larger, more expensive traditional cinema cameras like the FX6, the FX9, and of course the infamous Sony Venice. All of those cameras, because of their size, they just can't compete with the portability of this package. So I think that if you're really valuing having a small package and having the ability to really maneuver this thing anywhere that you want to go, quickly and efficiently, I think that the Sony FX3 is going to offer you quite a bit of value, even though there are, of course, better options out there. They do cost quite a bit more, and they're quite a bit more cumbersome. And so I think that this really makes this a desirable camera, especially for indie filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, and anybody who really just wants to pick up a camera and go run and gun style. I think that this is a pretty great platform to do that on. That being said, as a cinema camera, it has quarter 20 mounts all over the body, which allow you to rig it up in any way that you like, including using a rail system or adding a cage like I have on here, which has a lot more mounting points and options for you. I think that really this offers something for everybody, and it's really versatile. So that's certainly something that can't be overstated, and it's a primary reason why I decided to go with this camera for both my personal and professional projects. Another big reason why I went with this system is the Sony E-mount. So Sony E-mount is basically the proprietary lens mount for Sony, and there's wide support for this among both first and third parties. So of course there's a lot of great Sony glass out there. This lens here is, like I said, the Sony 200 to 600G. It's an f5.6 to 6.3. There's also, of course, other great lenses like the smaller Sony 24 to 105, which I also have, and that produces amazing results with a constant f4 aperture throughout the zoom range. There's other amazing lenses out there like the Sirui 50mm 1.6x anamorphic, and tons of other great glass from manufacturers like Tamron and Sigma. So there's quite a bit of variety here and a lot of support. You can get lenses that are on the cheaper side or more expensive depending on what you choose to go with, although I would highly recommend that if you do choose to go with this system that you also invest in good glass, as good glass is going to really make a pretty big difference in your picture quality, in some cases even more so than a camera. But I think that another thing that's great is that the Sony Venice, although it does natively support the PL mount, it also supports the E mount. If you just remove a couple of screws and swap the mount, you can use E-mount. And so there's also incentive on the high end for producers of cinema glass to manufacture high-quality cinema-grade lenses for this system. And so you can take advantage of that by buying into the system as well, which is really great. And so that further expands the capability of this camera by allowing you to really craft a unique look for your productions. Ultimately, in many ways, I think that the lenses have more of an effect on the quality of your final product than the body itself. So definitely don't neglect looking into the ecosystem behind lenses so that we buy into the best system that has the most longevity, long-term, and the most support from both first and third parties so that we can get the exact look that you want out of your productions. And although, like I said, glass is really important, I also think that this particular body has a number of features that really make it exceptionally easy to use and highly versatile for anybody who's a professional or a prosumer. So starting out with one of my favorite features, for the type of content that I typically produce, the record button that's on the front of this camera, if you're a YouTuber or you want to produce content like a course or any type of personal project where you need to be in front of the camera, this feature is a pretty big lifesaver. The next major quality of life feature for professionals especially is the fact that this camera contains 3 clearly visible tally lights on the body itself, with the option to also use an on-screen tally if you so choose. And so that's really great because it makes it completely unambiguous when you're actually recording and when you're not. Especially if you're in a high-stress situation, like say a wedding or something like that, where you're taking a lot of time to set up all of your equipment, get the settings just right, and get everything else that you need to have done ready. It can be a little bit difficult sometimes to remember if you pushed record or not. And in those scenarios, if you don't record, your shoot is over and you're not getting paid. With this camera though, it's very, very easy to see if you are recording because your record button on the top is going to light up, the red light on the front of the camera is going to light up, the red light on the back of the camera is going to light up, and like I said, if you have an external monitor connected or if you just use the internal monitor, you can have an on-screen tally which will also light up red. So that is something that is highly critical for professionals who are going to be using this to make money, so that way you don't waste time and you don't lose out on clients by simply forgetting to push record. Another thing that I think that professionals and prosumers alike will really appreciate is the fact that you can customize nearly every single button on this camera to perfectly tailor your user experience to your particular shooting style. So that is something that's really, really critical. If you really want to get into this, I think that it's definitely worth it to take the time to go through and set this up so that way you get the features and functions that you use the most on hand with just the press of a button rather than having to go through the menu. Although Sony has improved the menu system quite a bit in recent years with this new touchscreen menu system, I think that it's so much more simple than it ever used to be. But still, pushing a button is way easier than navigating through hundreds and hundreds of menu items. So I would highly recommend when you get this camera, take some time and go ahead and set this up for your particular use case. I'll be coming out with a video pretty soon that'll show you guys a full setup guide for this amazing camera, so that way you don't have to go into this blind. You can have some of my recommendations if you choose to use them straight off the bat. And although I've given this camera quite a lot of praise, it's not perfect, of course. There are going to be some things that you'll definitely want to know, especially if you're working professional who uses this on higher end productions, or if you're used to using higher end cinema cameras. And starting off the list, this camera does not have shutter angle. If you're not a professional and you're not familiar with this term, don't worry about it, but shutter angle is a term from the old days of film where the shutter used to be rotated in front of the camera sensor, and that was basically set by the operator. If you were shooting at 24p, you would set your shutter angle to 180 degrees. And so that's what is commonly referred to these days as the 180-degree shutter roll. It gives the most natural motion blur for a given frame rate. And as you may have heard from other videos, to replicate this effect in mirrorless cameras, you need to set your shutter speed to 1/2 times your frame rate, which in the case of 24p means that you need to set your shutter speed at or close to 1/48. So although the math isn't really hard, having to do this constantly when you're switching between shutter speeds can be a bit of a pain. So to get around this fact, with the FX3, what I do is just set up a custom memory mode for 1, 2, and 3 that have the 180-degree shutter roll incorporated at 24, 60, and 120 FPS. So that way I can just simply switch between them and not have to think about it. And so that way I get the most natural motion blur for all of my productions, regardless of if I remember to set the shutter speed or not. It's already included in my setup. Another thing that professionals especially would care about is the capability of this camera to do all intro recording. With the FX3, you can only do 24, 30, and 60p XAVCS-I recording. And so with that, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the 120 FPS capabilities, since that would just push way too much data through, and even the fastest CF Express Type A cards are not going to be able to keep up with it. If you do want to take advantage of the 120 FPS, you're going to have to step it down to a little bit more compressed codec like XAVCS, or what I use, which is the even more compressed format XAVC-HS, which is my codec of choice since it produces smaller file sizes than all of the other codecs. The one thing to note about that is if you're not using a powerful computer or one of the new M1 Max or something like that, you're going to have probably a bit harder of a time processing that particular file type, where the less compressed versions, XAVCS, XAVCSI, are probably going to be better for you, but just keep in mind that those codecs require you to have much faster storage. So speaking of storage, you're definitely going to want to invest in CF Express Type A cards if you are in fact a shooter who needs to use all intra, because especially if you're talking about shooting at 60p in the all-intra codec, it's going to require you to have a 600 megabyte per second file write speed, which is way more than even fast V90 cards. So that's definitely going to be a consideration for you. And just to talk about the pricing on those types of cards, in recent years, Sony has actually opened up the manufacturing capabilities to third parties. So I was able to find a 520 gigabyte card made by Pergear for just $359. But generally speaking, until very recently, that wasn't an option. And the only thing that you had was Sony cards. And those Sony cards, if you wanted to buy a 1.9 terabyte CF Express Type A card, only one would cost you $1,369, which is really, really expensive. And like I said, you're going to need those if you're going to be shooting in XAVCSI 4K 60 in 422 10-bit color. That's, like I said, going to be 600 megabytes a second, and only that card is able to get that fast. But the good news is that if you're happy with using XAVC-HS, you can go with cheaper SanDisk or other manufacturer V90 SD cards and you'll be just fine. But luckily, as I had mentioned previously, if you really want to have the most flexibility, you can shoot in RAW on this camera. And so for that, of course, you're going to need to purchase an external recorder like the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus to record RAW. And you can only record 4K 24 or 4K 60p in ProRes RAW externally through the full HDMI port. But the great thing about this option is that you can use cheaper and more available SATA SSDs. So in particular, I use the Samsung Evo SSDs, which are just $60 for a terabyte, which is pretty affordable and so much more affordable than the faster CF Express Type A cards for internal recording. And like I said, with RAW, you're actually going to be getting pretty much the option to adjust your ISO and your white balance in post as if you were adjusting them while you were recording. So it's definitely a great thing for pros. A lot of people are not really going to need to use that, but I figured I'd mention it as something that you might care about if you are, in fact, a professional. And just another thing to note about that before we move on is that if you want to take full advantage of ProRes RAW, you're going to need to use Final Cut Pro 10, or I think Adobe Premiere also supports it. Since DaVinci Resolve, which is what I use primarily right now, doesn't support ProRes RAW natively, you're going to have to use one of those other programs to do your pre-processing, so setting white balance and your ISO, and then you'd have to export it to a codec that DaVinci works better with. In my case, I use ProRes 4444XQ, and so that'll work generally well for DaVinci. Another thing to note about RAW is that you're going to see a lot more noise out of the RAW recording than you are going to see out of the internal recording from this camera. In particular, you're definitely going to have to use noise reduction in post. Even if you turn off all of the noise reduction and processing and stuff like that inside of the FX3, the files are still going to be processed more so. And that's evident if you compare the internal recording straight out of camera to the RAW recording. You're going to see a lot more noise. So they're definitely doing something to reduce the noise in this camera. Thankfully, though, that noise reduction algorithm that they use is really good, and I haven't really seen a major benefit of using RAW versus this, especially considering the fact that the RAW workflow is quite a bit more advanced and more complex. Like I said, you will get better results using RAW, but you're going to need to know a lot more about processing, a lot more about color, and you're going to need to do a lot more work to get it to the same level that you just get if you took straight out of the FX3. But like I said, for pros, it's there. It's great to have. But like I said, you're definitely going to have to factor in that it's going to take a lot more energy to produce a final product with RAW, and your turnaround speed is going to be a lot slower as a result. So overall, especially if you're like me and you're considering this camera as an upgrade from your smartphone for your professional and personal work, or if you're a user of a cheaper dedicated camera and you'd like to step up to a more professional level full-frame mirrorless camera, honestly, I don't think that you can go wrong with the FX3. This camera's image quality will blow you away, especially if it's your first time ever seeing the 10-bit color and full-frame image quality. It's definitely going to blow you away. For me personally, it was absolutely insane seeing this level of image quality on my screen during editing. I know that YouTube doesn't really do it justice because of all of the compression that goes into it, but you will definitely see a big difference. Your clients will see a huge difference. Overall, this just adds a lot of production value to your productions. And with the 10-bit color, it really makes a huge difference. It goes a long way towards allowing you to craft your own unique look for your footage. And it gives a lot of latitude in terms of making corrections. Also, the audio out of the top handle is outstanding. And with the right mic combination, I think that you can deliver absolutely professional results quickly. Since it records directly into camera, you don't need to worry about timecode sync or anything like that. But with that being said, do not buy this camera if you're just starting out. If you don't have a knowledge of lighting, composition, storytelling, editing, directing, all of those things are going to serve you so much better in the long run than buying a complex piece of equipment like this straight off the bat, because this is above your level. Let's just be real. If you don't have a lot of experience, it's going to take you a lot more to learn how to use this camera effectively. It's going to be more complicated than you need at this point in time, and I think that your time and your money would be better spent in terms of learning how to actually create videos, how to produce videos, how to think about your composition, how to craft a story. All of those things are going to make so much more of a difference than just buying a new piece of equipment. At the end of the day, though, this is an incredible camera, and I definitely would recommend it to anybody who's interested in stepping their cinema game up. And it's definitely going to be able to do pretty much everything you want it to do. With that being said, if you do choose to pick one up, leave a comment down below. What do you like about it? If you already have one, definitely also leave comments down below. Do you like it? What do you wish that it had? What do you want to see in a Sony FX3 version 2 if they come out with one? All of those types of things I really love interacting with you guys about, so definitely be sure to drop comments down below. And even if you're not a Sony shooter, what camera is your favorite to use? If you guys found this video helpful, please drop a like, leave a comment, smash the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.